Nobody wanted the role. The biggest names in Hollywood looked at the script for Dirty Harry and said no. Frank Sinatra said no. John Wayne said no. Paul Newman said no. Steve McQueen, Robert Mitchum, Burt Lancaster, George C. Scott, they all said no. The role sat there like poison, bouncing from star to star, and nobody would touch it. Then Clint Eastwood, who wasn't even on the original list, said yes. And that decision created one of the most iconic characters in cinema history and changed action movies forever. It was 1970, and Hollywood was changing. Crime was surging in American cities. The Zodiac Killer was terrorizing San Francisco. People were scared, frustrated, angry that the system couldn't protect them. The courts seemed more interested in protecting criminals' rights than victims' rights. Into this climate came a screenplay called Dead Right, written by husband and wife team Harry Julian Fink and Rita M. Fink. It was about a San Francisco cop named Harry Callahan, who was tired of playing by the rules while a serial killer murdered innocent people. When the system failed, Harry took matters into his own hands. The script was dark, violent, controversial, and Hollywood didn't know what to do with it. ABC Television looked at it, thinking maybe they could turn it into a TV movie, but the violence was too much. So Warner Bros. Picked it up, but they needed a star. The character was written as a man in his mid to late 50s, world-weary, cynical, burned out. Frank Sinatra was 55. He'd recently starred in The Detective, playing a cop investigating a serial killer. Perfect casting. Warner Bros. Offered him the role, and for a while it looked like Frank Sinatra would be Dirty Harry. Director William Friedkin and producer Phil D'Antoni spent 6 months preparing to shoot the film with Sinatra. Screenwriter John Milius rewrote parts specifically for him. They were ready to go. And then Sinatra pulled out. Years earlier, during the filming of The Manchurian Candidate, Sinatra had broken his wrist. It never healed quite right. When they showed him the .357 Magnum that would become Dirty Harry's signature weapon, Sinatra picked it up, felt the weight, and said, "I'm afraid it's a little too big for my hands." That massive Magnum, the gun that would become as iconic as the character himself, was too heavy for Sinatra to hold comfortably. 6 months of prep work, gone. The project was dead. Warner Bros. Wasn't ready to give up. They started making calls. And the list of actors who turned down Dirty Harry reads like a who's who of 1970s Hollywood. John Wayne was approached, the Duke, America's cowboy, but Wayne said no. First, he didn't like being offered Sinatra's rejections. That's what he called them. Wayne had an ego, and taking a role Frank Sinatra had already turned down felt like an insult. Second, Wayne thought Harry Callahan was a rogue cop. Wayne was very protective of his image. He only played characters with a strong moral center. Dirty Harry crossed too many lines for Wayne's taste. Years later, after seeing the finished film, Wayne admitted he'd been wrong. "When I saw the picture," he said, "I realized that Harry was the kind of part I'd played often enough, a guy who lives within the law but breaks the rules when he really has to." But by then, it was too late. Robert Mitchum was next. He looked at the script and called it a piece of junk. Pass. George C. Scott was riding high after winning the Oscar for Patton. He read the script and turned it down. The violence bothered him. Too brutal, too dark. Burt Lancaster said no for the same reason. Too violent.
Steve McQueen had just starred in Bullet, playing a San Francisco cop. Dirty Harry seemed like a natural fit. But McQueen didn't want to do another cop movie. Plus, he thought Harry Callahan was too right-wing. Pass. Then they went to Paul Newman. Newman, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Newman read the script and immediately understood what it was, a political statement disguised as an action movie. Newman was a vocal liberal, literally on Richard Nixon's enemies list because of his opposition to the Vietnam War. Newman looked at Harry Callahan, a cop who tortured suspects and ignored constitutional rights, and said no. The character was too right-wing. But before he hung up, Newman said something interesting. "You should get Clint Eastwood. He'd be perfect for this." Clint Eastwood, The guy from those Italian westerns? The man with no name? He was 41 years old, not exactly a fresh face, but not old and weathered like the character was originally written. And here's the thing, Clint wasn't on anybody's original list. He was a suggestion from an actor who just turned down the role. When Warner Bros. Called Clint, his first question was simple. What happened to Frank Sinatra? He's got some problem with his hand and can't hold a gun. Clint thought that sounded like a pretty lame excuse, but it didn't matter. He'd been offered a lead role in a major studio picture. He said yes. But Clint had conditions. While the script was being shopped around, various writers had rewritten it, adding action sequences, changing the tone. One version had Marine snipers coming in at the end. Another turned it into a big action extravaganza with explosions. Clint read all of it and said, "No, I want the original script, the one by the Finks. That's the movie I want to make." The studio was surprised. Most actors would jump at more action sequences. But Clint understood something they didn't. The power of Dirty Harry wasn't in explosions or Marine snipers, it was in the character. One cop, alone, frustrated by a system that protects criminals while innocent people die. This is losing the point of the whole story, Clint told them, of the guy chasing the killer down. It's becoming an extravaganza that's losing its character. So they went back to the original script. Clint brought in Don Siegel to direct. Siegel had directed Clint before in Coogan's Bluff. They understood each other. And Clint brought something to the role that nobody else could have brought. He brought silence. In the hands of Frank Sinatra or John Wayne, Dirty Harry would have talked more. He would have explained himself, justified his actions, maybe shown remorse. Those actors came from an era where the hero always had a moral speech ready. But Clint didn't do that. He made Harry Callahan a man of few words. When Harry talks, it matters. Every line is clipped, efficient, brutal in its honesty. No wasted dialogue, no philosophical speeches, just action and consequences. The famous hot dog scene, where Harry takes down bank robbers while eating his lunch, came from Clint watching James Cagney in White Heat. Cagney comes out eating a chicken leg and shoots a guy in the trunk of a car. Clint thought that's offsetting but in a nice way, so he put Harry eating a hot dog during a shootout. Casual violence, disturbing, perfect. And then there's the line that became one of the most quoted in cinema history. I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? Well, to tell you the truth, in all this excitement, I've kind of lost track myself. But being this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off, you've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? Try to imagine John Wayne saying that line. You can't. It doesn't work. Wayne would have known exactly how many shots he'd fired. But with Clint, with Harry, you genuinely don't know if he's bluffing. The moral ambiguity is the whole point. When Dirty Harry premiered in December 1971, the reaction was instant and polarized. Pauline Kael, the famous film critic, called it fascist. She said it glorified police brutality and vigilantism.
The New York Times called it a right-wing fantasy. The New Yorker said it was medievally static and hopelessly naive. Feminists protested outside the Academy Awards with signs that read, "Dirty Harry is a rotten pig." But audiences loved it. They packed theaters. They cheered when Harry threw away his badge at the end. They memorized the dialogue. Dirty Harry made over $35 million domestically, an enormous sum for 1971, and it turned Clint Eastwood into one of the biggest movie stars in the world. The controversy made it bigger. People who hated it told their friends how dangerous it was. People who loved it told their friends it was the coolest movie they'd ever seen. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone talked about it. The film spawned 4 sequels: Magnum Force, The Enforcer, Sudden Impact, The Deadpool. Each one made money. Dirty Harry became a franchise, and Harry Callahan became an icon. More than that, Dirty Harry created a template. Before Dirty Harry, cop movies were mostly about detectives solving mysteries. After Dirty Harry, every cop movie wanted a cop who didn't play by the rules, who got results no matter what. The entire loose cannon cop genre that dominated the 80s and 90s started with Dirty Harry. Bruce Willis in Die Hard, Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, Arnold Schwarzenegger in practically everything, they all trace back to Harry Callahan. And none of it would have happened if Clint Eastwood hadn't taken a role that every other major star in Hollywood turned down. Think about what would have happened if Frank Sinatra had been able to hold that magnum, or if John Wayne had swallowed his pride, or if Paul Newman had decided politics didn't matter. Would Dirty Harry have worked? Maybe. Would it have been iconic? Probably not, because none of those other actors could have brought what Clint brought. The silence, the moral ambiguity, the sense that this man might actually be just as dangerous as the criminals he's hunting. Clint understood that Harry Callahan wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was a symptom of a broken system, a man pushed so far by bureaucracy and legal loopholes that he becomes the very thing he's fighting against. That's dark, that's complex, and that's why the movie still works today. In 2012, Dirty Harry was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. A film critics once called fascist propaganda is now considered culturally significant. And Clint? Clint never seemed bothered by being everyone's second choice. When asked about Paul Newman turning down the role first, Clint said, "Of course, my first question was, why didn't he want to do it? He thought the character was sort of a radical guy on the right, so politically he couldn't do it. I didn't see it that way. I'll miss him. He was just one of those guys you liked." No bitterness, no ego, just gratitude for the opportunity. That's the Clint Eastwood way. When everyone else said no, he said yes. When everyone else wanted it make it bigger and louder, he made it smaller and quieter. When everyone else saw a controversial political statement, he saw a character study about frustration and justice in a broken system. And that's why 50 years later, we're not talking about Frank Sinatra's Dirty Harry or John Wayne's Dirty Harry. We're talking about Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry. Because some roles don't just need a star, they need the right star. And sometimes the right star is the one nobody thought to ask until everyone else said no. That iconic scene with the bank robbers, that famous line about feeling lucky, that whole movie that changed action cinema forever, it almost didn't happen. It sat on a shelf, rejected by the biggest names in Hollywood, a script nobody wanted to touch, until one guy, who wasn't even on the list, decided it was worth doing. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes being the second choice, or the fifth choice, or the choice nobody even thought of, can still lead to greatness. Have you ever been overlooked for something only to prove everyone wrong later? Let us know in the comments and ring that notification bell for more true stories about the legends who took the roles nobody else wanted and turned them into icons.